Welcome back, listeners. Ready for another deep dive. This time, we're tackling a big one, the afterlife.
Ah, yes, the great mystery.
Exactly. But we're not just, philosophizing. We've got some really fascinating sources to dig into. From CNN Arabic, we have a bunch of articles, and then there's this really interesting short story from Wattpad called I Went to Death with My Feet.
Sounds like a pretty diverse mix.
Oh, it is. We're talking near-death experiences, what happens in the brain when we die. Oh, and even, digital legacies. It's wild.
The afterlife in the age of the internet, huh?
Exactly. Okay, so first up, CNN Arabic. There was this story about a child in Egypt who supposedly came back from death.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one. It totally blew up on social media, didn't it?
Oh, for sure. It was huge. And what's really interesting is how the story fed into those existing beliefs about the afterlife in Egypt. I mean, some people were totally convinced, others not so much.
I bet. It even got the attention of the Ministry of Interior.
I know, right? A government statement about a potential resurrection. It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it.
Blurs the lines between the spiritual and the official, that's for sure.
Totally. And it wasn't the only story like that. CNN Arabic also covered one from Iraq, where people were hearing, knocking sounds coming from a grave.
Oh, yeah, that was a creepy one. And, of course, social media just took it and ran with it.
Of course. I mean, who doesn't love a good afterlife mystery? But let's switch gears a bit. We've talked about some of those, anecdotal stories. But CNN Arabic also had this article about a study on near-death experiences, but from a scientific perspective.
Ah, so they were actually trying to measure what's happening in the brain during those experiences.
Yeah, exactly. When they're resuscitating someone, what's going on neurologically, especially when people talk about having these really profound experiences.
Right. Are those experiences just a product of a brain that's, under stress, or is something else happening?
Totally. So what did they find?
Well, they found some pretty interesting brain activity patterns, like patterns that suggest heightened consciousness, even though technically the person's heart isn't beating.
Whoa. So even when the heart stops, the brain could still be, super active.
Potentially, yeah. Which makes you think, is consciousness just a function of the brain, or could it, exist separately? It's a question a lot of people have pondered for centuries.
Right. And it makes those stories, like the one from Egypt, even more intriguing. Could there be a scientific explanation for what people are experiencing?
It's a thought, isn't it?
Right.
Of course, we need more research, but it definitely challenges those traditional ideas about the brain and consciousness and what happens after death.
For sure. Okay, so let's go from Egypt to, get this, Singapore. CNN Arabic also had an article about this museum dedicated to the 10 courts of hell.
Oh, wow. That's a pretty heavy topic for a museum.
It is. It's based on Buddhist tradition, and it's super graphic, detailed depictions of the punishments waiting for people who, weren't so virtuous in life.
Oh, I see. So very different from those news stories where the afterlife seemed more ambiguous.
Yeah, totally different vibe. It's all about karma in this museum, a warning to live a good life or else.
Right. Different cultures, different ways of thinking about what happens after we die.
Absolutely. And it's not just about, ancient beliefs either. CNN Arabic had several articles about death in the digital age, how we're dealing with all that now.
Oh, that's a fascinating topic. I'm always curious about what happens to our online identities after we die.
I know, right? CNN Arabic had one article that talked about managing online accounts after death.
It's something a lot of us don't really want to think about, but it's a real issue.
It is. It's almost like we're trying to extend our existence, even after we're physically gone. And then, get this, they also covered an underwater city for cremains.
Wait, what? An underwater city?
Yeah. It's this memorial reef where they incorporate people's ashes into these artificial coral structures.
That's a new one. It's kind of beautiful, but also a bit eerie,
Totally. But it shows how, our relationship with death is changing, especially in the 21st century. We're finding new ways to, commemorate it, maybe even make it a little less, scary.
It's definitely pushing the boundaries.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about some real-world examples. Now let's get to that fictional story from Wattpad. I went to death with my feet. What's the basic premise?
So there's this young guy, right? And he meets this woman, but she's not just any woman. She's incredibly beautiful, but there's something, mysterious about her, almost like she's not really, from this world.
Intriguing. So he's drawn to her, but there's a sense of danger.
Exactly. The story plays with that line between reality and fantasy. You're never quite sure what's real and what's, symbolic. And the title itself, I Went to Death with My Feet, doesn't exactly sound like a walk in the park, right?
Not at all. It sounds like he's venturing into dangerous territory, maybe even risking everything to this woman.
Totally. And that brings up a question. What is it about her that's so captivating? Like, is it just physical attraction, or is there something more going on?
Yeah, that's the question, isn't it? Is he drawn to her because she's beautiful? Or because she represents something, beyond the everyday, maybe even a connection to that, like, that realm beyond what we know?
Right, right. Like she's a pathway to something else.
Exactly. And that ties back to what we were talking about earlier, that human need to reach beyond the tangible, to explore the mysteries of life and death, even if it means taking risks.
It's like those near-death experiences, that urge to know what's on the other side,
Exactly. And that's what makes these stories, real and fictional, so compelling.
Yeah,
They tap into that deep-seated human fascination with the unknown.
totally agree. And I think that's a great place to, pause for now. We've got a lot to unpack here, and we'll dive deeper into all of this in our next segment, so stay tuned.
It's amazing how that Wattpad story, even though it's made up, it still kind of connects with those CNN Arabic articles.
Oh, yeah. Like how...
Well, like that whole blurring of what's real and what's not, and that, like, wanting something more than just everyday life.
Right, like it's speaking to something deeper in us.
Exactly. And it gets me thinking about how different cultures deal with these big questions. I mean, look at that Egyptian kid and all the different reactions, and then you have that Singapore museum with its intense karma stuff.
Yeah. It's like each culture makes its own map of the unknown.
Right. Trying to figure out these big mysteries.
Yeah.
But let's go back to that Wattpad story for a sec.
Okay.
I'm really curious about that woman. You said she had that, like, otherworldly vibe.
Yeah.
What do you think that means?
Ooh, that's a good question. Like what she's symbolizing.
Well, there are a few ways to see it, but maybe she's death itself, or at least our idea of it. Beautiful, mysterious, and totally out of reach.
Whoa, I like that. So the guy chasing after her, is it like he wants to escape,
Yeah, maybe. He's so into what's beyond this life, he'll risk anything for a peek.
Yeah.
And it sort of links back to those near-death experiences.
You mean the ones where their brains are super active even when their heart stops?
Exactly. Makes you think maybe they're tapping into a different kind of awareness.
Right. And maybe there's a real reason they see that light and feel so peaceful,
It definitely makes you question what we think we know about life and death.
For sure. And that Wattpad story does that too, right? It makes us wonder what's real and what's not and what might be out there beyond our senses.
Totally. And that's what's so cool about exploring the afterlife. It makes us confront our fears and hopes, our beliefs and doubts, and ultimately our own mortality.
Heavy stuff. But it's not all doom and gloom, right? Remember those CNN articles about digital afterlife services and that underwater city for ashes?
Oh, yeah. Those were cool examples of how tech is changing how we see death.
It's like we're trying to live on digitally.
And there are some ethical things to think about, too, like who owns our online stuff when we're gone? And what about privacy? It's a whole new side to the afterlife debate.
It really is. And it shows how our ideas about death keep changing.
Right. And it's not just about technology. Think about that Egyptian psychologist who didn't believe in the whole torment in the grave thing.
Oh, yeah, he was saying that belief might just come from fear, not actual facts.
Exactly. So are our beliefs about the afterlife based on real spiritual stuff, cultural things, or just how our minds cope?
That's a tough one. No easy answers there, but it's good to think about it, right?
Absolutely. And that brings us back to stories both true and made up. They shape how we see the afterlife. Whether it's that kid in Egypt, the brain study, or that guy in the Wattpad story, they give us ways to explore these big questions.
And even if we don't get clear answers, they make us think harder, see things differently, and find meaning, even when things are uncertain.
Totally. So out of everything we've looked at today, what really sticks with you?
That's a good question. It's striking how all these sources from different places, even different types of stories, they all seem to have a few things in common.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Like, we all want to understand death, right? We want it to mean something, to have purpose. And also, there's no one right answer. Our view of the afterlife keeps changing as we learn more about ourselves, the world, and how our minds work.
You're right. And even though we're more secular now, those big questions haven't gone away. We're still searching for answers, trying to connect with something bigger and finding comfort when things are uncertain.
And it feels like those questions are even more complex now with all the new technology and brain science.
Exactly. We're learning so much, which brings up even more questions about consciousness, life after death, what it all means.
It's exciting, but kind of scary too, right?
Totally.
Right.
We're in a time where These ancient questions are being looked at in new and amazing ways.
For sure. It's like we're not just watching this cosmic play, we're in it, shaping it with our beliefs, actions, and our search for answers about life and death.
Well said.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? All this new stuff about death and the afterlife.
It does. Yeah, like we were talking about before, those digital legacies.
Right. It's almost like people are trying to, live forever online.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. And then there's that underwater city for cremains, that CNN Arabic article.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that one.
Oh, that?
It's like we're finding new ways to remember people even in the physical world, not just online.
And I think it's cool how that underwater city thing combines nature with, human stuff. It's like returning to nature even after death.
Yeah, it's kind of beautiful.
Right.
Death becomes a part of life,
Exactly. It shows that deep down, we want things to have meaning to continue even when we're gone.
Totally. And remember those near-death experiences we talked about? People are looking for proof that, a part of us lives on.
And the crazy thing is, science is starting to take those experiences seriously. Like that brain activity study we talked about. What if those people are really tapping into something we don't fully understand yet?
Right. It makes you question everything we thought we knew about the brain and consciousness and, what's possible.
It really does. And who knows what we'll discover in the future. Imagine if we could really understand what happens in those near-death experiences.
Wow, that'd be amazing. It could change how we see everything.
Right. And we have to think about the ethics of it all, too. Like, what if we could actually prove there's an afterlife or even extend consciousness? How would that change how we live? Our values, our beliefs, everything.
Those are some deep questions.
They are. And it's wild to think that we're exploring these age-old mysteries with science and tech now.
It's like science, spirituality, and philosophy are all coming together.
I know, right? Makes you wonder if there's one big answer out there that explains it all.
Huh. If only we knew.
Yeah.
But hey, at least we're asking the questions, right?
Absolutely. And that's what I love about this deep dive. We've looked at so many different ideas, from old beliefs to new research, real-life stuff, and even fictional stories.
And what's really stood out to me is that even though we don't have all the answers, just exploring these things has been amazing. It's made me curious and made me question things. And maybe it's even helped me see the world a little differently.
I feel the same way. And as we wrap things up, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about. Imagine you could design your own afterlife. What would it be like? What would make you happy and fulfilled there? And how would that change how you live your life right now?
Wow, that's a great question. It reminds us that even though we don't know what happens after we die, we can still choose how to live now and make our lives meaningful.
Exactly. And with that, we'll leave you to ponder your own vision of the afterlife. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking those tough questions, and never stop searching for knowledge.
And remember, the journey is just as important as the destination.